Welcome to part 3 of the Biblical Hebrew Israelites. If you haven't watched parts 1 and 2, please stop and go back to watch those videos first so that you will be able to better follow along with this continuation, which is part 3. Picking up where we left off, the article that I will be discussing in this presentation was and still is very helpful to me for my first introduction to DNA information pertaining to those of us who are descended from the Dark Continent, Africa. I put this together with identities of people according to Yahuwah Elohim, or the Lord God, as well as the missing or hidden history about the Negro, which will be yet another presentation. A link to this article that I will be discussing, as well as another one on the same website that I found as I was making this presentation, are both in the description box below. Let's begin. What is a haplogroup? A haplogroup is a genetic population group of people who share a common ancestor on the patriline or the matriline. A haplogroup is a major branch on either the paternal or maternal tree of humankind. Quote, E1b1, EP2, the most dominant Y chromosome haploid in Africa. EP2 is likely to have originated in the Ethiopian highlands of East Africa, as this is the place with the high frequency of ancestral subclades of this haplogroup. EP2 diverged into two predominant subclades, E1b1a, or EV38, and E1b1b, or EM215, approximately 24 to 27,000 years ago. My note: notice that this article reads E1b1, or Mediterranean and Sub-Saharan DNA comparison. But the article begins by telling us that the E1b1 is the most dominant Y chromosome haploid in Africa. So this haplogroup has nothing to do with the Mediterranean at all, which is primarily inhabited by white or Caucasian people. In the Torah, Kittim and Javan, or Yavan, which are modern-day Cyprus and Greece, located in the Mediterranean Sea, are identified as descendants of Japheth, or Yaphet, by whom the Gentile nations were established. Genesis chapter 10, verse 5. Haplogroup E1b1b. Quote, E1b1b is found at high frequencies outside Europe, over 80% in Morocco and East Africa, Somalia, and Ethiopia males makes about 40% to 80%. North African countries of Tunisia, 70%, Algeria, 60%, and Egypt, 40%. In the Middle East region, Jordan, 25%, Palestine, 20%, and Lebanon, 17.5%. On the European continent, Eastern and Central Europe, Kosovo has the highest concentration, over 45%, Albania and Montenegro, both 27%, Bulgaria, 23%, Macedonia and Greece, both 21%, the island of Cyprus and Sicily, both 20%, South Italy, 18.5%, Serbia, 18%, and Romania, 15%. The article states E1b1b is found at high frequencies outside Europe. Well, of course it is. E1b1 is the DNA of people of Africa, not Europe, as stated in the beginning of this article. The article states that on the European continent, Eastern and Central Europe, Kosovo has the highest concentration, over 45%. Yet on the African continent, the E1b1 is much higher, in the range of 80% and above. I clicked on various countries in Europe and in Africa on the haplogroup map connected to this article in order to look at the percentages of the E1b1b haplogroup, and consistently it is much higher on the African continent among Black people. I also noticed that the E1b1a haplogroup was highlighted on these maps when my search was specific only to the E1b1b haplogroup. Hold on to that thought for later in this presentation. Kosovo, E1b1b, 20.5%, E1b1a, 0%. Albania, E1b1b, 21.8%, E1b1a, 0%. Montenegro, E1b1b, 21.2%, E1b1a, 0%. Bulgaria, E1b1b, 16.8%, E1b1a, 0%. Macedonia, E1b1b, 20.5%, E1b1a, 0%. Greece, E1B1B, 21.8%, E1B1A, 0%. In the region of Italy, Sicily, E1B1B, 20.5%, E1B1A, 0%. Sardinia, E1B1B, 9.5%, E1B1A, 0%. Serbia, E1B1B, 21.8%, E1B1A, 0%. Romania, E1B1B, 7.6% and 5.3%, E1B1A, 0%. Lebanon, E1B1B, 0%, E1B1A, 0%. Saudi Arabia, E1B1B, 3.4%, E1B1A, 1.1%. Austria, E1B1B, 8%, E1B1A, 0%. Russia, E1B1B, 3.5%, E1B1A, 0%. Israel, E1B1B, 16.1%, E1B1A, 0%. Morocco, E1B1B, 75.9%, E1B1A, 3.4%. Somalia, E1B1B, 81.1%, E1B1A, 1.5%. Algeria and Egypt, E1B1B, 57.9%, E1B1A, 0%. Ethiopia, E1B1B, 81.1%, E1B1A, 1.5%. By stating that, quote, on the European continent, Eastern and Central Europe, Kosovo has the highest concentration, over 45%, this tricks the mind into believing that almost half of the DNA of a European is that of the E1B1, thereby making one believe that the European is somehow the indigenous African and not the actual African himself. Is anyone awake yet? This is the psychological mind game that is played. First, attach oneself to an indigenous people. Second, repeatedly identify oneself right alongside the indigenous person, thereby blurring the lines between who is actually who. Third, completely remove the indigenous person and take on the indigenous person's identity in word, all the while physically appearing and remaining as one's original self, both biblically and historically. A few minutes ago, I shared with you the percentages of the E1B1B haplogroup found in Africa, the Middle East, and Europe, about which the article goes on to state the following, quote, distribution map of haplogroup E1B1B in Europe, North Africa, and the Near East. Haplogroup E1B1B, formerly known as E3B, represents the last major direct exodus from Africa into Europe, believed to have appeared first in the Horn of Africa about 26,000 years ago and scattered to North Africa and the Near East during the Paleolithic and Mesolithic periods. E1B1B lineages are closely linked to the diffusion of Afro-Asiatic languages. The highest genetic diversity of haplogroup E1B1B is noted in Northeast Africa region in Ethiopia and Somalia, which also have the monopoly of older and rarer subclades like M281, V6, or V92. More specifically, Ethiopia and Somali males belong mostly to the V22 and V32 subclades, but possess also a minority of M81, M123, and V42 subclades. My note, please notice that the article mentions Europe first, then Africa, and finally the Near East. This goes back to what I said. First, attach oneself to an indigenous people. This was done beginning with the title of the article identifying the E1B1 DNA as, quote, Mediterranean and Sub-Saharan. Second, repeatedly identify oneself right alongside the indigenous people, thereby blurring the lines between who is actually who. Third, completely remove the indigenous person and take on the indigenous person's identity and word, all the while physically appearing and remaining as one's original self, both biblically and historically. Quote, Albert Einstein, acclaimed theoretical physicist, is presumed to have belonged to Y haplogroup EZ830, based on the results from a patrilineal descendant of Naphtali Hirsch Einstein, his great-grandfather. Quote, relatives of Adolf Hitler were tested by the geneticist Ronnie DeCourt, and he concluded that the Reichsfuhrer belonged to haplogroup E1B1b. Ironically, this haplogroup believed to be at the forebearer of Afro-Asiatic languages, which includes the Semitic languages and peoples Hitler despised so much. My note. If you remember in part 2 of this presentation, I did an experiment showing that language comes from the culture, not the opposite way around. Although I can read, write, and speak the German language, this does not change my DNA. I am still genetically a Negro. Looking back at the 6 photos on the row of E1B1b, there are 4 white faces and only 2 black faces. Detailed information is given about 2 of the white men pictured who belong to the E1B1b haplogroup, yet nothing is mentioned of the actual black man himself from whom this DNA originates on the African continent. These white men belong to an African haplogroup because they each inherited their Y chromosome from a black man of African descent. The 4 white men in this picture are not Negroes, any more than a black man who belongs to a European haplogroup is a European or a Caucasian. This has been done for a purpose. I like how Dr. Rudolph R. Windsor boldly stated the unspeakable truth in his book entitled From Babylon to Timbuktu. In Chapter 6 on page 105, he stated the following. Dr. Windsor, quote, because most of the history in the Western world has been distorted, it becomes necessary for me to explain to you some of these distortions. Says Heinrich Barth, a European writer, quote, the inhabitants of Wallata are a mixed race of blacks and whites. Dr. Windsor, quote, now the question is, whom does he include as his whites? Continues Barth, quote, the whites are Berbers and Arabs. Dr. Windsor, quote, these Berbers and Arabs were not whites in ancient times. What is his basis for calling them whites? The obvious reason is that he wants to attribute ancient advanced civilization to the white race in order to perpetuate the philosophy of white supremacy. Many black people have straight noses and thin lips. The black people that possess these qualities are said to have a white morphology, form. Joseph Williams has this to say about the blacks of West Africa, quote, in most mixed group of Negroes, a Songhai may be identified at first glance. His skin is black as theirs, certainly, but nothing in his mask conforms to their well-known characteristics. The nose of the Songhai is straight and long, pointed rather than flat. The lips are comparatively thin, and the mouth wide rather than prominent and broad, while the eyes are deeply set and straight in their orbits. A cursory glance shows that the profile resembles that of the European. Dr. Windsor, quote, some European writers even penetrate into the blackest Africa and divide the blacks according to the shape of their noses and lips. Continues Williams, quote, the Songhai, though black-skinned and woolly-haired, their features are often of Caucasian cast. Dr. Windsor, quote, there are many colored people in the United States with straight noses and lips, even as black as tar, and the Europeans do not classify these colored people as belonging to the white race. After extensive research, my conclusion is this. Some European writers have classified certain tribes in Africa and Asia as belonging to the white race. They do this as long as it is psychologically advantageous in order to inflate their ego and to give them a prominent place in Afro-Asiatic history. End quote. Although a link to this video is in the description box below, I'm unable to show it in my video for copyright reasons, so I will direct your attention to this short video, which further helps to drive home my point instead. At 1 minute and 49 seconds into the video through 2 minutes and 10 seconds, the narrator notes that he feels a strong connection to the Benin bronzes, being that he is someone who was born in Africa. Please note, he is a European born in Africa. That does not change a person's bloodline, and the history of what happened to the Nigerian people certainly does not apply to the people who oppressed them. One cannot be both the oppressor and the oppressed. Also notice that the narrator's hair has been twisted, much like the African hair braiding styles, and the narrator's skin appears darker as the camera zooms closer to his face in the presentation. There is one more thing that caught my attention at 3 minutes and 52 seconds through 3 minutes and 56 seconds toward the end of this video clip. Did you catch toward the end of this video clip how the viewer's attention was subtly focused upon the description of the physical features of the Portuguese traders, who, although are European, they are not the founders of this great civilization deep in Africa? This is yet another slick psychological maneuver used to trick the mind into eventually believing that the Negro is not the Negro, but the white man is the Negro, thereby allowing the European nations to take credit for the civilization of another culture, not their own. And as we also know, the word negro is the Spanish word for black, which both the Spanish and Portuguese frequently used when referring to people of the dark continent, Africa. Dr. Rudolph R. Windsor studied psychology and political science at a community college in Philadelphia. He then continued his studies at Gratz College, where he majored in Hebrew Aramaic studies, Temple University, where he majored in Middle Eastern studies, and the University of Metaphysics, where he received his PhD in metaphysical philosophy. I encourage each person in this Hebrew Israelite awakening to purchase, read, and glean from this book as you deepen your understanding. A side note, and something you can further research for yourselves. Dr. Windsor stated in Chapter 6 on page 105 of his book that the Berbers and Arabs were not whites in ancient times. The original Arab people were and still are black. I know that this is a shocking statement, but I encourage you to start looking into this. At one time, I searched the question, quote, "Are the Arabs black?" And the answer stated, quote, "And it is indeed not easy to define what is meant by an Arab. The Arabs are not a distinct ethnic group, since there are both white Arabs and black Arabs. Some of the black Sudanese Arabs claim descent in the male line from Arabs of Muhammad's time, and may well be correct in their claim." End quote. While putting together this presentation, I found the source of this quote, which comes from the University of Pennsylvania in the African Studies Department. The authors are listed here. I've also found that the term Arab means wanderer, which pertains to a way of life and not so much a bloodline. Something shocking to me that I found in the Blue Letter Bible is that Esau, who was Jacob's brother, is also the father of the Arab people. Esau, Harry, the eldest son of Isaac and Rebekah, and twin brother of Jacob, sold the birthright for food when he was hungry, and the divine blessing went to Jacob, progenitor of the Arab peoples. If you look at an ancient biblical map, like this one in my King James Study Bible, you will see that the area known then and even today as the Negev was also known as the Arabah. The Arabah lies in the area of the land of Esau, which was called Edom. Esau's descendants moved about in this area. I'm not dismissing Ishmael, the brother of Isaac, as being a father of the Arab people, and Ishmael certainly is a son of Abraham, but understanding that the term Arab pertains more to a way of life and not so much a bloodline, I found it interesting that the word Arabah, which contains the word Arab, is also located in the same land of Esau, which is Edom.
Now these are the generations of Esau, who is Edom. Thus dwelt Esau in Mount Seir. Esau is Edom.
Ronald Dalton's movie Hebrews to Negroes Part 2, Revelation, gives some very interesting information on this topic at around an hour and 42 through 44 minutes into the movie. He says that in the Arabic language, the original black Arabs are referred to as Al-Arab al-Baqiya, or they are referred to as the real Arabians, Al-Arab al-Ariba. Within Christianity, it may be acknowledged that Messiah Yahushua, Christ Jesus, was not, quote, white, but then Christianity will say the Messiah was, quote, mixed or Middle Eastern, but certainly not black. Brother Ronald Dalton goes on to say that the present day mixed appearing people in the Middle East, who the world has known as the Arab people, are what is referred to as al-Mustaliba or mixed Arabs. This is a mixture of the Japhetic, Shemitic, and Hamitic bloodlines, which has to do with descendants of mixed marriages. In connecting the E1B1Y chromosome being found in white men in the Mediterranean and Europe, there is a history of Arab men, the black ones, raping and enslaving white women. This is one event of which I'm aware that contributed to the E1B1Y chromosome spreading from Africa into the Mediterranean and into Europe. You can look further into this for yourselves if you feel led to do so. This is very controversial information, I'm well aware, but at one time I rejected any possibility of the biblical Hebrew Israelites ever being a people of color, more specifically of African descent, and it never crossed my mind to even consider the claims. The good Lord has since revealed that there is an abundance of information, more accurately, overwhelming information, in support of this biblical Hebrew awakening. This information has always been known. It has just been concealed from the mainstream on purpose. And as I've said before, and I'll say it again, the power behind this great deception is the adversary, Hasatan, who we call Satan. This is why I encourage you to buy both DVDs by Ronald Dalton for in-depth information that most likely you will not hear from either the church or the synagogue, although there are some clergy who have spoken about this in their churches or in their synagogues. Here are 2 trailers for the Hebrews to Negroes, Wake Up Black America, and 1 trailer for Hebrews to Negroes, Revelation.
You never thought this day would come, and no, it is not a dream, it's very real. We ain't playing games no more. We taking back what is rightfully ours.
Hebrews to Negroes, Wake Up Black America. Judah, it's time to go.
Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. and they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles, until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled.
Let's continue with this presentation in the Biblical Hebrew Israelites, Part 3b.